You're nothing, Ethan. My daughter deserves a real man. There it was. The Harper family classic. I stood in Franklin Harper's kitchen in Chicago, watching him swirl his coffee like he was about to read my fortune in the grounds. I'd heard this speech so many times, I could probably recite it backwards. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every time I stepped into his house. But today, for some reason, it hit a little deeper. Maybe it was the way he said, nothing, like he was announcing the weather. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 37. For the last 12 years, I've built a private equity firm out in Seattle. I make investments most people never even hear about, and I do it quietly, through shell companies, trusts, and holding firms. My name is buried so deep in paperwork, even the IRS would need a search party. I like it that way, clean, invisible, powerful. But right now, I felt about as powerful as a wet paper towel. Franklin kept going, Rachel could have married Dr. Simmons' son. But no, she picked you. A man who won't even tell us what he really does for a living. Rachel sat at the breakfast table, poking at her eggs like she was searching for a hidden message. She didn't look up, didn't say a word, just kept stirring her food like it might give her the answer to everything wrong with us. Ethan works in finance, Dad, she finally mumbled, still not meeting my eyes. Finance? Franklin scoffed. That could mean anything. For all we know, he's selling insurance or managing someone else's retirement accounts in a strip mall. I watched him pace around his granite kitchen island, his face getting redder with every lap. This was Franklin Harper, CEO of HarperGen, a biotech company that hadn't turned a profit in 4 years. He'd inherited the business from his father and thought that made him a financial genius. What he didn't know was that I'd been tracking his company's financials for almost a year. HarperGen was bleeding cash, desperate for a miracle. They needed exactly the kind of anonymous investor I specialized in being. But hey, what do I know? I'm just the guy who can't even get a decent cup of coffee in this house. You just sit there, silent, Franklin said, pointing at me. A real man would defend himself. I took a breath. You're right, Mr. Harper. The kitchen went so quiet, you could hear the existential dread. Rachel finally looked up, confusion on her face. Even Franklin seemed surprised. I am right, he said, but his voice was less certain. Absolutely, I said, standing and reaching for my jacket. Rachel deserves better. I walked toward the door, feeling their eyes on my back. As I reached for the handle, I heard Rachel's chair scrape against the floor. Ethan, wait, she called, but I was already outside, breathing in the cold Chicago air, wondering if I should just keep walking until I hit Lake Michigan. I met Rachel 5 years ago at a conference in Portland. She was presenting research on gene therapy, brilliant, passionate, a little nervous. I was there scouting for investment opportunities, not love, but life's funny that way. Our relationship moved fast. Within 18 months, we were married in a small ceremony. Franklin complained for weeks. He wanted something bigger, something to impress his country club friends. But Rachel and I wanted something simple. Or so I thought. Turns out, simple is not in the Harper family vocabulary. The problem started during our first Christmas as a married couple. Franklin, after too much bourbon, started grilling me about my work. I gave him the same vague answers I gave everyone: private investments, portfolio management, consulting for high-net-worth individuals. All true, but I left out the part where I was the high-net-worth individual. My company, Miller & Company, managed over $200 million in assets, specializing in early-stage tech and medical companies. Discretion was my brand. Also, I just didn't want to explain what a convertible note was to a man who thought Bitcoin was a new kind of breakfast cereal. But Franklin saw my secrecy as weakness. He started making comments about my mystery job and how a real man would be more transparent. Rachel would change the subject or laugh it off, but she never told him to stop. Never stood up for me. I guess awkward silence was our family tradition. The attacks escalated. Franklin would make snide remarks about my clothes, my car, my lack of ambition. He'd compare me to other men in their circle, doctors, lawyers, guys who drove expensive cars and talked loudly about their achievements. What made it worse was watching Rachel shrink during these confrontations. The confident scientist I married became quiet and apologetic, always making excuses for her father's behavior. She'd pull me aside after brutal dinners and whisper apologies, promising it would get better. But she never confronted him directly. I started to wonder if I should just wear a name tag that said, "Sorry, I exist." 3 months ago, I discovered something that changed everything. While researching potential investments, I came across HarperGen's funding documents. The company was in serious trouble, burning through cash faster than Franklin could burn a bridge. They'd approached dozens of venture capital firms, but their debt-to-revenue ratio scared away most serious investors. That's when I realized I had a choice. I could help save Franklin's company through an anonymous investment, or I could let it fail. The businessman in me saw the potential upside. The son-in-law in me saw something else entirely. I started the due diligence process, keeping my identity buried behind layers of corporate structure. Franklin would never know his salvation was sitting at his dinner table, listening to his insults, watching his daughter stay silent. The breaking point came during Rachel's birthday dinner. We were at Franklin's house, and he'd invited his brother-in-law, a surgeon who loved talking about his new boat. "What about you, Ethan? Any big purchases lately?" he asked. Franklin's eyes lit up, ready for the kill. "Ethan doesn't make those kinds of purchases," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "He's more practical, aren't you, Ethan?" Rachel squeezed my hand under the table, a warning to stay calm. But Franklin wasn't finished. "Let's be honest. My daughter is a brilliant scientist. She could have married anyone, a doctor, a lawyer, someone with real prospects. Instead, she settled for," he gestured at me. "Well, we all make mistakes." The room went silent. Rachel's hand went limp in mine. Her uncle stared at his cake, and Franklin sat there with a satisfied smile, waiting for my reaction. I looked at Rachel. Really looked at her. She was staring at her lap, her face flushed with embarrassment, not for her father's behavior, but for me, for being married to someone her father considered beneath her. That's when I understood this wasn't going to get better. Rachel wasn't going to stand up for me because, deep down, she agreed with him. Maybe not completely, but enough to stay silent, enough to let him tear me down in front of her family. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and looked directly at Franklin. "You're absolutely right," I said. "She does deserve better." I kissed Rachel on the forehead, grabbed my coat, and walked out. Behind me, I heard Rachel calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I had work to do. And maybe a donut to buy, because I was definitely not eating that cake. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to think. For months, I'd been preparing investment documents for HarperGen, a $15 million funding package that would save Franklin's company and secure his retirement. The paperwork was ready. All it needed was my signature. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the dashboard, and made my decision. I wasn't going to sign those documents. In fact, I was going to do something much more satisfying. I was going to let Franklin Harper learn exactly what it felt like to need someone he considered worthless. Spoiler alert, it doesn't feel great. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Marcus, and asked him to draft 3 documents: a formal withdrawal of investment interest in HarperGen, a notice of contract termination for the pending funding agreement, and a confidentiality release that would allow me to reveal my identity as the anonymous investor. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" Marcus asked. "You've spent months on the due diligence. The investment fundamentals are sound, despite the family drama." "I'm sure," I said. "Sometimes the best investment is the one you don't make. And sometimes, it's the one that makes your ex-father-in-law sweat through his country club polo." By noon, I had everything I needed. Marcus would deliver the withdrawal notice to HarperGen at exactly 10 a.m. the following morning. I wanted Franklin to have a full day to panic before he understood what had happened. That evening, Rachel came home late. She'd been staying at her sister's place since the birthday dinner, and I could tell from her posture that she'd been crying. "We need to talk," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "My dad called me today. He's worried he went too far the other night." I almost laughed. "Worried? He wants to apologize. Did he lose a bet? Maybe we could have dinner this weekend, just the 3 of us. Start over." I studied her face, looking for any sign that she understood what had really happened. But Rachel was still thinking this was about hurt feelings and wounded pride. She had no idea her father had just insulted the one person who could save his company. "Rachel," I said quietly, "how long have you been ashamed of me?" The question caught her off guard. "What? I'm not ashamed. You've never once told your father to stop insulting me. Not once in 3 years. He doesn't mean it. He's just protective. He called me worthless in front of your entire family. You said nothing." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know what to say. "He gets so angry when people confront him. So you chose his comfort over my dignity. That's not fair." But it was fair, and we both knew it. Rachel had made her choice long ago. Every time she stayed silent, every time she made excuses for his behavior, she was choosing her father over her husband. "I love you," she said, which somehow made it worse. "I know you do. But love isn't enough when you won't fight for it." She left an hour later, and I knew she wouldn't be coming back. Not really. Even if we stayed married, even if we went to counseling and worked through our problems, there would always be a part of her that saw me through her father's eyes. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to my office. At exactly 10 a.m., I called Marcus to confirm that the withdrawal notice had been delivered to HarperGen. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. "Ethan." Rachel's voice was shaky. "Something's happened. Dad's company just lost their major investor, $15 million. He's completely falling apart." "I'm sorry to hear that. The lawyers won't tell him who pulled out. They said it was an anonymous investment group, but now they're claiming breach of confidentiality terms. Dad's talking about bankruptcy." I stayed quiet, listening to her breathing on the other end of the line. "Ethan, I know you work in finance. Do you think you could maybe ask around? See if anyone knows anything about this investment group?" The irony was almost too perfect. She was asking me to help find the investor who could save her father, not knowing she was talking to him. "I'll see what I can do," I said. After I hung up, I drafted 2 text messages and scheduled them to be sent the following morning. The first would go to Rachel. The second would go to Franklin. Both would arrive at exactly 10 a.m., along with a third message from Marcus. By tomorrow afternoon, everyone would know exactly who they'd been dealing with. That evening, I went through the HarperGen files one more time. What I found confirmed everything I'd suspected about Franklin's business sense. The company had been hemorrhaging money for 18 months, ever since a failed product launch that Franklin had insisted on pushing through despite warnings from his research team. He'd overruled his own scientists, convinced his business instincts were superior to their technical expertise. The resulting disaster had cost HarperGen their partnership with 2 major pharmaceutical companies and nearly $3 million in development costs. But instead of accepting responsibility, Franklin had blamed the research team, fired 3 senior scientists, and started shopping for new investors to bail him out. What made it worse was that Rachel had been one of the scientists who'd opposed the launch. She'd written a detailed memo explaining why the product wasn't ready for market, but Franklin had dismissed her concerns as typical overcaution from academic researchers. When the launch failed exactly as she'd predicted, he made her life so miserable that she eventually quit and found work at a smaller firm. Rachel had never told me the full story. She'd mentioned disagreements with her father about research priorities, but she'd framed it as a difference of opinion rather than what it really was, Franklin's arrogance destroying sound scientific judgment. I called Rachel's former colleague, Dr. Lisa Chen, who'd left HarperGen around the same time as Rachel. Lisa and I had met at several industry conferences, and she'd always been candid about the challenges of working in biotech. "Lisa, this is Ethan Miller, Rachel's husband. I hope you don't mind me calling." "Ethan?" "Of course not. How's Rachel doing?" "She's fine. I'm actually calling about something else. I'm researching HarperGen for a potential investment, and I wanted to get your perspective on their research capabilities." Lisa was quiet for a moment. "Ethan, can I speak freely?" "Please." "Franklin Harper is a disaster. Brilliant scientists, solid research foundation, but the man has no business running a biotech company. He treats his research staff like factory workers and makes decisions based on ego rather than data. Can you give me an example?" "The neurotropin launch. We had 6 months of testing data showing the compound wasn't stable enough for clinical trials. Rachel wrote a 20-page analysis explaining exactly why it would fail. Franklin ignored it, pushed the launch forward, and lost the company nearly $3 million when the FDA rejected the application. What happened to Rachel after that? Franklin blamed her for the failure. Said she was being negative and uncommitted to the company's success, made her work environment so toxic that she had to leave. Honestly, it broke my heart. Rachel is one of the most talented researchers I've ever worked with. After I hung up, I sat in my office until nearly midnight, thinking about everything Lisa had told me. Franklin hadn't just insulted me at family dinners. He'd destroyed Rachel's career because she had the courage to tell him the truth about his bad decisions. The $15 million investment I'd been preparing wasn't just going to save his company. It was going to reward him for years of arrogance and poor judgment. It was going to validate his belief that he was always right, even when he was catastrophically wrong. More importantly, it would mean that Rachel would never have to choose between her father and her husband. She could keep both relationships intact, never confronting the fact that she'd stayed silent while he tore me down. But now she was going to have to choose. And based on everything I'd learned about Franklin Harper, I had a feeling I knew which choice she'd make. The next morning, I arrived at my office early and made one final review of the withdrawal documents. Everything was in order. Marcus would deliver the formal termination notice to HarperGen at 10 a.m. At the same time, my scheduled text messages would be sent to Rachel and Franklin. At 9:45 a.m., I called Rachel. "Ethan, is everything okay? I need to tell you something important, but I want you to sit down first. You're scaring me. I'm the anonymous investor who pulled out of HarperGen." Silence. Complete silence for nearly half a minute. What? My company, Miller & Company, was prepared to invest $15 million in your father's biotech firm. I withdrew the offer yesterday morning. That's impossible. You work in portfolio management. You don't have $15 million. Rachel, I own Miller & Company. We manage over $200 million in assets. I've been the anonymous investor your father's been courting for 8 months. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow. This is some kind of joke. Check your phone. You're going to receive a text message in exactly 10 minutes. So is your father. The message will be from me, confirming everything I just told you. Ethan, this doesn't make sense. If you have that kind of money, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't need you to know. And because I wanted to see how your family would treat someone they thought was beneath them. So this is what? Some kind of test? No, it was going to be an investment right up until your father called me nothing in front of your entire family and you said nothing. Rachel started crying. I should have defended you. I know that. But Ethan, this is my father's life, his company. You can't destroy it because your feelings got hurt. This isn't about my feelings, Rachel. It's about respect and consequences. Please don't do this. We can fix things. I'll talk to him. I'll make him apologize. It's too late for apologies. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text confirmation that both messages had been delivered. Rachel's phone buzzed at the same time. Oh my God, she whispered. Ethan, please. I'm begging you. Don't destroy my father. I'm not destroying him, Rachel. I'm letting him face the consequences of his own choices. This is cruel. What's cruel is watching your husband get torn down for 3 years and never saying a word to stop it. Rachel hung up. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Franklin, and he was screaming before I even said hello. You think you can destroy my company because I hurt your feelings? Mr. Harper, I think you've misunderstood the situation. I've misunderstood nothing. Rachel told me everything. You're the investor. You're the one who pulled out. That's correct. 23 people work for me, Ethan. 23 families depend on this company. You're willing to destroy all of them because I said some things you didn't like. Actually, Mr. Harper, I'm willing to let your company succeed or fail based on its own merits, without my money propping it up. We had a preliminary agreement that I chose not to sign. No laws were broken. No contracts were violated. Franklin was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. What do you want? Nothing, Mr. Harper. I don't want anything from you. There has to be something. Money, an apology. What? I want you to understand what it feels like to need someone you consider nothing." I hung up and turned off my phone. It was over. 3 days later, Rachel filed for divorce. She came to the house while I was at work and packed her things, leaving only a letter on the kitchen counter. The letter was 2 pages long, but it boiled down to one simple message: she couldn't be married to someone who would deliberately hurt her family. What she didn't mention was that she'd also cut off all contact with her father. I found out from Lisa, who'd heard it from another former HarperGen employee. Rachel had confronted Franklin about how he treated me, and when he tried to justify his behavior, she told him exactly what she thought about his business decisions, his treatment of his research staff, and his years of verbal abuse. According to Lisa, the conversation ended with Rachel telling her father that he'd destroyed her marriage and her career and that she never wanted to see him again. Franklin called her dozens of times after that. She never answered. Within a week, news of HarperGen's financial troubles spread through the biotech community. 2 more potential investors pulled out, spooked by the company's debt ratio and the sudden departure of their lead funding source. Franklin was forced to lay off 8 employees and close his secondary research facility.